the first things first, let's introduce ourselves. So I'm Pete Johns. I'm the Director for Customer Success and Growth in Europe for SWOOP Analytics. I'm joined today by Kai, who I'm sure many of you know. He sort of flies all over the world. Kai's currently over in the US, so adapting to some jet lag, I'm sure. So if at any point anybody notices Kai's head starting to droop, please shout out, and we'll get someone to prod him with a big stick and just say, "No sleep just yet, Kai." Also on today's call, really the person who's going to be sharing most today is Dr. Lawrence Lockley, who is author of the Benchmarking Report, author of many of our benchmarking reports, obviously all of our benchmarking reports. But this is a particularly exciting one for Laurie, being focused on the question of how people are using the suite of core collaboration tools in M365 to really work effectively, particularly in the hybrid working world that we tend to be operating in right now. So yeah, let me just say welcome. This is the three of us today. As I say, Laurie will be doing most of the talking. I'll be managing the chat. The one thing I would invite you all to do is, as we go through, if you have any questions or any thoughts or ideas pop into your head, please feel free to share them in the chat, and we'll be monitoring that throughout. And there'll be time at the end of the session as well to come off mute and ask any questions and have some further discussion. But yeah, let's jump on to the agenda. Just so you're aware of what you're in for today.
Is Kai frozen or
sorry,
changing the slide? He's lost his job. We
As
gave him one job.
Jet lag is a real thing. When you're traveling from Australia to America, we can be forgiving, Kai. But yeah. So we're going to obviously discuss the key findings from the report and recognise our champions. So being the inaugural report, we've selected those leading organisations, leading people, teams within those organisations, and we'll reflect on those winners around to give you some ideas of what good looks like in Microsoft 365 powered collaboration. Then I'll be doing a brief demo to show you how SWOOP for M365 can help you measure your maturity, I guess is one way to put it, in terms of the way that you collaborate using Microsoft 365. And as I said, there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. If you could jump into the next slide, Kai, what I would really like to do is invite all of you to either jump onto menti.com and use the code on screen there, so 10582445, or if you have your smartphone handy, pick it out and take a snap of that QR code, and it should take you to a polling site where you can respond to this question. So what are your organization's biggest digital collaboration sins? This is the sort of genesis of the SWOOP for M365 product, was actually off the back of a blog post a while back that Laurie put together around the 7 deadly sins of the digital workplace. And we love to see what pain points people have.
Has it come up, the dynamic results? Can you see them?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, you can see it.
So it feels a bit like one of those old arcade games with the horse race, where it's lines jumping through. Who's going to win? We've currently got meeting overload is a strong front runner. But I think this is really interesting to see across a wide range of organizations on a global scale. There's some really strong themes of what gets in the way of effective digital collaboration, and these sins, I think, are a really interesting way to kind of explore that. I think it's pretty clear from those initial responses that meeting overload is a pain felt by many on here. That is very interesting. It will get more interesting as Kai and Laurie share the highlights. But thank you to those who've responded. The poll will continue to run. we'll share the results of that after the event. But if you flick on to the next slide, Kai, I think at this point, Kai, maybe I'll hand over to you to just take people into the detail behind the report and some of those key highlights before we hand over to Laurie.
Absolutely, this sounds fantastic. I'm just going to give the sort of the 30,000 feet summary, and then I'm going to hand over to our chief nerd, Dr. Lawrence Lockley, to take you through some of the underlying charts behind it. But we're quite excited. We looked at 18 organizations and 213,000 M365 accounts. Now that's when you include guest accounts. So there's about 113,000 left when we take out the guests. We also looked at departmental information, so we were able to identify about just shy of 4,000 different departments, and it's very interesting to look at how people collaborate, like how different or similar people's collaboration styles are within departments. So we'll share some results on that as well. So strap your seatbelt on. Here's the seven key insights from the report. The first one we framed as, we call it all the gear and no idea. And I think it's to add a bit of a sort of humoristic spin on it, but it does it's a very telling way of explaining the current situation. And we've all paid for M365, and it can do a lot across all the different collaboration tools. There's so much functionality, and I said the best way we can describe current state when we look at how people are actually using it must be all the gear and no idea. Laurie will talk a little bit about how varying people's practices are. And we use a framework, which is our 7 collaboration habits to basically put a behavior against the use of M365. And we'll come back to that. The other big thing is that these, I guess, more modern, more open, transparent ways of working asynchronously, particularly through using Teams channels and Yammer, is dramatically underutilized. Well, we think they are. When we look at a 6 months period of data, and we can see that 14% of people are actively contributing to Yammer. Some feedback we've had to say, well, that's actually doesn't sound that low. I mean, it's meant to be sort of a place where you go in and share things from time to time. We just think that over a 6 month period, that should be more than 14. There are a lot more people reading though, so 82% are reading Yammer, so it's a brilliant platform for internal comms. We just like to see more active contribution, and the same goes with the channels part of it. There's no problem with adopting chat. People are actually, the next one, as you can see, is that there are constant interruptions from chat because there's so many people using that. But it's the channels bit that is woefully underutilized. So there are so many chat messages that we now start to call that sort of, we've created this email on steroid, and Laurie will come back to that, what we mean by email on steroid, but we'll come back to a little bit later. But it's a lot of interruptions that are happening there. Also creating efficiency, and it's great that it's popular, I guess, but there's also something like too much of a good thing. I alluded to this thing about people's collaboration habits vary widely. So for those of you that had a chance to look at the report, or just if you followed our sort of recent writings, we compare collaboration habits using these 7 collaboration habits. And those are things like, are you email liberated? Are you an asynchronous collaborator? Are you a community contributor? And that 7 of them in total. So it's a way of thinking about how people are collaborating, not so much just saying like how many emails are you sending. It doesn't really matter. It's about how much email you're sending compared to other things that you are doing. So it's all about balance. So the collaboration habits seems that people have wildly different balances. And we're going to talk more about what that means. And we're producing some additional blog posts at the moment that's diving even more into that. About what is the risk as an organization we have when people are working very, very differently. The other sort of just rounding up, I guess, the summary of what's in the report. We have done we provide some numbers about ROI calculations, and it was good to see in the Menti poll that you rated the email the email overload, meeting overload as 2 of I think they were the 2 top scoring challenges that was in the Menti poll. We've actually, that reflects our perception of reality as well, which is why we've gone to the length of creating two sort of very strong ROI calculations for you about how much time can be saved by just tweaking the way that M365 is being used, by thinking about your collaboration habits. We provide an ROI calculation for that in the report, and it's not insubstantial. We use an organization but the numbers scale, of 10,000 people. And when we're looking at the savings you can make from becoming email liberated and working more asynchronously, it's like 26 minutes per day per person. And when you add it up at an average working, number of working days and an average salary, then you actually end up at $70 million per year. So it is quite substantial. I think, Laurie, it was the equivalent to about 5% of staff costs or something like that, or headcount. So it's quite a lot. On the good side, on the upside, right? What's really what we get excited about this is that, yes, so it is all gear and no idea at the moment. Yes, people have wildly different habits. There is huge ROI opportunities if we improve just a little bit. We're not talking about total transformation of the way we're doing things. Let's just focus on getting some of the basics just a little bit better. And leaders, because we looked at how leaders are collaborating, or their collaboration practices versus non-leaders, and that is actually looking pretty good too. They are markedly better. I guess you can say, well, that's an interesting one from Emily Schumer saying our leaders are way behind. So that's I guess we should say this is an average across all 100,000.
Yeah,
So,
that was my hypothesis actually leading into the analysis was exactly that.
Yeah.
And I was surprised by the result.
Yeah, so that's nice, Emily, for you to comment on that. They also, of course, it is important though, if that is the situation, that we do focus on the leaders, because they have and will have a key role to play in getting their teams to work in a more consistent way. The last bit, and of course we can't not have this in here because we are SWOOP Analytics. The reality is that tracking this to what James Clear in his book Atomic Habits that we reference in the report, he talks about the importance of if you want to implement a new habit, you're more likely to stick with it if you're measuring it as well. So it is something that's going to be important for us to do this, and we've got to find a way of doing that at scale in our organizations. And I think, Pete, towards the end of this, when we got through some of the findings, you'll just give people an opportunity to see how we're doing that within SWOOP. So those are the core 7 things, core 7 insights that are in the report. And then we back this up with lots of data, of course, and charts and numbers to show you that both that we talk about this all the gear, no idea, the wildly varying practices and the very peculiar distribution of the data points. So on that note, I'll hand over to Laurie to talk about some of these things, in particular, like this, I guess what surprised us about how much, myth there is in the popular media about how people are overloaded and get interrupted all the time. And then when we try to sort of take that and then compare that with the reality of what we're seeing in the data. So I'll hand over to you, Laurie, to just take us through that.
Okay, thanks, Kai. All right, well, I guess what was one of our first main findings is what I'm calling the great digitally disconnected. So we're reading every day about people that are overloaded and people with too many meetings. And of course, you people on this call, I believe that that's actually the case with you. But the way that we do our benchmarking is that we don't survey, right? We measure what everybody in the organization is doing, right? So we don't miss anybody. So there's a lot of people that are digitally disconnected that will never fill in a survey or come to a webinar like this, right? So they're nearly invisible, if you like. And what we found in the example that Kai put in was that for the ones in meetings, measuring how much time people are spending in meetings, and we know this precisely because we get the audio time that people have. That the busiest 10% of staff consume 42% of all the minute time spent. Right, and the bottom 50% only account for 6%. Right, and I think Kai's got a like 15 minutes a day interacting, right? So they're not overloaded. Right? In fact, they're underloaded, you know, so, but they're invisible as well, you know, so this is what I see as one of the big challenges, you know, of how do we get the digitally disconnected actually participating, because they're not in the office anymore, right, at the moment, you know, and I know a lot of the CEOs want to bring them back in the office because they just can't see what's going on. But, you know, that might not happen, you know, if we continue to run in hybrid. You know, these are probably the sort of people that don't want to come back in the office either. So in essence, you know, we've got to deal with this issue, and it's a big one. So let's move on to the next one, Kai. So that was number one. Now, Kai talked about this, you know, like, what we're seeing here is the average time that people spend per day in M365 activities. And it probably doesn't surprise you that the biggest thing is reading emails, right? And sending emails is a bit below that as well. Audio is actually your meetings, right? So these are areas that you're spending a lot of time on, and these are areas of high stress. But we know that you can substitute some of those activities, you know, especially email. So we conservatively said, well, what happens if you substituted sort of Teams channels or Yammer discussions with 20% of your email? Right? What happens if you substituted those sorts of ways of communicating with, say, half of your meeting time? Now, half sounds a lot, but, you know, there's a number of articles that say that I've read that said, you know, this is how you can save at least half the time in meetings, because a lot of meetings are just, you know, what have you been up to? And we know that you can sort of share that without having to be face-to-face in a meeting and causing disruption of having everybody be in the same place at the same time and all that sort of stuff. So in essence, if you're able to do that, that takes the main stresses that we've already said about email and meetings, it takes it away, right? And it's a very simple practice. It's just swapping one thing for another. In fact, it's something you'll enjoy doing. And we certainly found that with our case study leaders. So next slide, Kai, and we'll go into the next one. Now, chat, right? So let me talk a little bit about chat, because chat is something it's
I think we just had a dropout on Laurie's Wi-Fi. He'll probably be in a moment, but just while Laurie's is reconnecting, the chat part of it was actually something that really certainly also took me by surprise. If you look at the distribution there, all the what you're seeing on the horizontal axis is number of individuals, so it goes up to about 113,000 people that I mentioned we had data for. And you can sort of see that there's a very small proportion of people that are incredibly, like really, really high number of a high amount of chat, but you can also see how fast that drops. So when you have this distribution of the data where there's a big drop, we talk about the long tail, and you can actually see that while chat is popular, what we often hear about is that it's certainly going to drive some people crazy for those that are in the very high, you know, the high usage part of this. But there's also a very large proportion of people that actually not even using chat, are using it very, very little on a day-to-day behavior. And now, for the ones that we've talked to that are using it a lot, the thing that we are hearing is that it is becoming, it's not kind of like, it's got the best and the worst of email, you know. So it's good because it feels private and it feels immediate. It's actually faster turnaround time than you would have for an email message. People typically respond within 10 minutes on a chat, whereas it's probably more like the expectation is within 24 hours on an email. So it feels really good that I'm sending something and, you know, we get something back. And it feels private and it feels secure in a way. But the problem is that if we thought we had an issue with email overload, where people are sending about, you know, I think it's about, I can't remember, was it like 20 something emails a week? Now it's more than double for chat at 65 messages per week. So we are taking one problem with all the, I guess, the shortcomings of email in that, and you've probably all been in those issues where, you know, email can be chaotic and wild and getting to do decision making, and people are copying each other in, and it gets to these huge email trees. We got to be very careful. We're not just saying, well, if we thought that was bad, we're now introducing something that is could become even worse, because now I'm getting a lot of interruptions. Not that a chat message takes a long time to respond to, but if I'm getting 65 of these or 100, and some of them are up in the thousands, it's really a challenge. So we talk about nipping this in the bud, and that is to go out straight away and then start to educate people about the good practices, the more effective ways of working. And that's actually where the channels come into place, finding a way of taking some of the work that would be done better in a Teams channel and move those things over there. Because a Teams channel is actually not about, it's about the topic first, and then it's there for everyone who's in the channel to read that sort of at their leisure when they want to read it. Whereas the chat message sort of requires, and there's an assumption for an immediate response to it. So, and that's some of the stories we've heard many times. Also, when we did the swoop for the Teams, our global Teams benchmarking report that came out in about a year ago, in May last year, was also the best practice organizations were saying we found a way of reserving chat to being very, very tactical, but in your real work actually happens in Teams channels. So that is about the chat component. I'll just talk a little bit about what we call the in-group variation. So what we looked at, remember I talked about the 7 collaboration habits, and you see the scores is the vertical axis that goes from 0 to 100%. So if you are being an absolute ace at all 7 of the collaboration habits, you will score 100%. So you can see how it ranges from 0 to 100. Then what we did, we looked at all the people, and we've then aggregated the data by departments. So, and that's what you're saying, how varying are the behaviors on the people. That's what you can see on the horizontal axis, on the x-axis, and it goes from 0 up to 0.45. So we up at 0.45, it's like they're totally different. So someone loves email, someone loves Yammer, someone loves chat, someone loves, and they will have their totally unique way of working. And you can see how the data falls. It looks like a boomerang. So the people that are in the lower left-hand corner, they're sort of blindly working in a way that is not very particularly sort of, you could call it very mature, not a very sophisticated use of M365, but at least they're all working the same. The people that are in the upper left-hand corner, they are very, very smart in the way they're using M365. They're operating at the highest level of collaborative performance. And the better thing is that they're all doing it the same within their departments. Now you can imagine how frustrating it would be when you're sitting somewhere in that sort of, that part. I'm going to try and see if I can highlight that here. When you're sitting sort of in this area that sits around here, where you actually find that there's some of the people that are pretty good, but there are also some of them that are actually not so good, right? So you have this thing where 4 of the team members actually have found out how to work in channels, but we have the grumpy person who's saying, nah, I would rather work in email. So there's a real risk here that it can lead to a lot of frustration within the team, that the team or the department is not working in a similar way. So our challenge, therefore, is probably not spend so much time down here in the bottom, because at least they're I'm not saying they are happy, but at least they're working the same way, and they've sort of all doing the lowest common denominator thing. The people up here are absolutely our case study, the people that are worth observing, because they are operating at high levels across the board. So those are the ones to be inspired by. These are the people that are getting there. They're becoming better and better. And we've literally turned the corner at this point in time here. So our challenge will be is to how do we take the people that are sitting in this area down here, show them the vision of what can be done, and help them turn the corner, literally turn the corner. Because when you start to have this thing when more and more people are working a particular way, it's going to be harder and harder to say, I insist on sitting and working in email. Okay, what digital habits are going to create the biggest impact? The reason why we were so interested in looking at this is, again, this thing about the variations, how different. You just saw the chart before that we see within some departments, there are obviously opportunities to focus on departments where they either have very low levels of collaborative performance, and this is in terms of how they're using M365. But also, what about the actual habits themselves? Like, where are the biggest opportunities? And we see the biggest opportunities are the spaces in which where people are working in the most different way. And that is with being an asynchronous collaborator. So that's where you are spending not so much, you're trying to balance the time you're having in online meetings, in Teams meetings, whether it's call to meetings. How do we balance that audio time with working asynchronously in Teams channels and on Yammer? That's where there's the biggest difference in how people choose to work. Number two is about email, which is how many emails do I send compared to how often I post in Teams channels on Yammer. That's the other big difference. And it's interesting because you highlighted here in the course, I said earlier, that's the two areas you highlight as the biggest challenges. And the data certainly supports your perspective. So we see them as the big, we call them quick win, because if you look at the ROI sections in the benchmarking report, it is not much we're asking for to get to that $70 million, for an organization with 10,000 people. We are kindly asking people to consider to take about 20% of the time they're currently spending on email and move that time into channels where we can reduce it to half. We're also asking people to say, well, should we really have this recurring meeting every week where we're talking about what we've done? Couldn't we be posting that asynchronously? So we don't need to have the meeting time, and we can cut the meeting time. We're not saying don't have meetings, just cut it. So Laurie, I've been just talking through the last couple of...
No, you've done well. I hope I've just lost internet totally on hotspotting on my phone. So it's amazing. Just perfect timing for the telco. We need city fibre over here, John.
All right, Laurie, I'll head over to you to take us through the
the leaders.
Leaders.
Okay. So just to let you know how we identified leaders, we, for some of the organisations in our benchmarking, they had role names, and we just mined the ones that had those sorts of terms down the bottom there in their role. So it's fairly simple process, and that's how we came up with the leaders. We end up with 12,500 leaders and 36,000 non-leaders, and that's how we came up with the 25% higher performance on. And with lower variation. So I think that's encouraging. I saw in the comments that some of you thought, well, your leaders were nowhere like that. Yeah, no doubt this is an average over 12,000. So I'd imagine there's some of those 12,000 that aren't so great. But when we look at it across all of the digitally disconnected, then of course that's why they come out better. And an average score of 0.65 is not too bad actually. So that's quite good. So so I guess we're coming back down to, well, what do we do about this? Because hybrid working, as you know, is very challenging. And if those of you that have read the report, we led with this study that I forget the company that was doing it, with all the different policies that the people were coming up with around hybrid. We've heard Elon Musk saying, come back to the office. We've heard others saying, no, we're all totally remote. Some very interesting discussions here. The majority of companies are falling in the middle, but that middle is a complicated middle, right? So, and companies are experimenting, as they should, because we don't know how this is going to pan out. We don't know how many people really will come back to the office. We don't know, how it's going to go over the next year or two. So organizations have to experiment, and I don't know of any way of experimenting without measuring, right? So without measuring continuously, without finding the positive patterns and trying to amplify those and dampening the ones that aren't working and so forth, and it's going to be a very dynamic period over the next 12 months or more. So measurement's critical, and and we're even seeing organizational structures that are changing. People are trying different structures to see if they can work, and we've seen some very positive outcomes from those, but they are experiments. So I guess what we're providing with SWOOP is the instruments that you can experiment with and see what's happening in close to real time. So in the next slide, Kai. Okay, so now to let you know, we do this sort of champions thing with the Amaranth teams and so forth. What we did this year is we looked at those 3,500 groups, and we divided them into small, medium, and large, because we thought, well, small groups have a better chance of collaborating better, looking better in collaboration than big groups. So we divided them up, and we looked at the ones that scored the highest on the average collaboration score. So that's the average of the 7 habits. And, and those that were right up the top were really doing a pretty good job, we felt. Now, the way that SWOOP does, what we do with these scores, when we identify a high-performing group, we go back to the organisation. We give them a few groups, and we say, look, we've measured these groups, and we think that they're high-performing. Now, sometimes people come and saying, well, that's obvious. They're wonderful, they're great, and what have you. Some of the bigger organisations will look at some of them and say, well, we actually don't know about that group. Where do they come from, and so forth. But we've never approached one of these groups and found out that they weren't very good at doing what we suggested they were doing. So to get on the top of these lists, they had to be performing pretty well, we felt. And in fact, when we went to talk with them, they were doing a tremendous job, an inspiring job. Now, these are some of the organisations that had top sort of top performing groups. So Christian Aid, that's a UK based organisation. Their top performing group was I guess it was what would you call it? It was an international help group. Yeah, a fund-based group in Africa. But I think the thing that we found about them, which was common with some of the others, was that they were inviting partners into their space, and they were very actively engaging guests. Right? A lot of people have, what we found was most guests are just guests. They just got invited, but they don't participate. These people were actively engaging with their partners as guests in their tenant. We saw that certainly with Engage Squared, and we saw that with Real Foundations. The City Fibre, we've got John here from City Fibre. We'll ask him to talk a little bit about City Fibre, but the team we identified there was their software development group of some 160 people, I think, sort of, Agile, if you understand Agile software development, it was very much based on being co-located. You're co-located, you've got the big dashboards up there, you're sitting pretty much right next to each other. You're standing up in the morning, telling each other what you're planning to do and so forth. They all had to go digital, right? And that's exactly what they did, and they didn't miss a beat. In fact, they invented some practices in working virtual that they'd never go away from again. So in essence, some of them would creep back to the office again, but it did prove that as an agile team, you can go. You don't have to be co-located. You can do just as good a job, in fact, better job, if you're working in hybrid or even totally remote. The other ones we've got.
Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe this is a good time to just get John, if get you sort of looped into the conversation as the person, I guess, representing City Fibre, but maybe just a comment about what's the amazing work that you guys are doing and the context of collaborate M365 and collaboration in City Fibre.
Sure. Well, the context is that City Fibre, as you said at the outset, has all the right tools, but absolutely as an organization does not have the right practices. And this group is different. They are the exception to the rule, because the minute we came along and said, we should really be working out loud, these guys were agile developers, and they're deeply committed to agile development. And the whole sort of ethos of agile development is get solutions out there and then improve them if they need improvement. And so for them, the philosophical kind of underpinning of working in teams is working out loud, and it just they got it right away. And of course they're technical folks, so they're not afraid to learn the few little bits of tooling, that the teams requires, for example. And they just made the switch. Beautifully. The truth is, like I said, they're the exception. The rest of our company, a lot of engineers, a lot of construction folks, almost all the other departments across City Fibre are a mile behind these guys in terms of their ability to sort of do what I consider high caliber digital collaboration. And so that's the nature of my job, which may be an endless job. Who knows?
Yeah, but it's one of the things we say in our benchmarking is that, you know, if you've got a good example, even if you've only got one good example, at least you have an example, right? And that's what we find with nearly all organizations. Even if you are performing poorly overall, you will find a gem in there somewhere. And that's all you need. And that's what we look to do to help people, you know, share their best practices internally and externally, if you like. So, but certainly internal benchmarking is very effective because, you know, you are working in the same business, right? So you should be able to do similar things, right? So, and I think one of our perennial sort of leaders, both in Yammer and Teams, is Real Foundation, the real estate consulting firm. So we know they were going to be good. You know, their CEO is totally embedded in the Microsoft ecosystem. You know, they've got maybe 400 or 500 people around the world, but you know, they have a managed services group that came up very high, but in essence, you know, they have their customers in their teams as if they were part of their teams. We saw this also with a number of the smaller consulting companies. You know, when they set up projects, they invite guests in, but that's their customers, and their customers aren't just there to have a look; they're there to participate in the activity. So we know that this is something that's evolving. You know, I was just reading a report from Deloitte recently about I think they were calling it the new ecosystem, I think, or supply ecosystem or something like that. But in essence, what they were saying is that, you know, like the boundaries of the firm are becoming impervious now. People are actually starting to link customers in, and we're starting to see not just customers and partners, we're starting to see that on the ground now with some of these leading sort of organizations and groups, you know, that they're trusting their guests and they're participating as if they're part of the internal team. So, and I think that's, as I said, there's probably 4 or 5 case studies in the report now, but that's growing because we can only put them in as they get approved. So you might find that those that downloaded the report early, you know, you'll find that if you download it now, there might be an extra case study or 2 or what have you in there. The case studies will be online separately as well, so you'll be able to search those separately from the report. So, but you know, one of the tougher jobs that Sharon, my co-author, has is not just writing the case studies. She's wonderful at that, but actually getting approvals is much harder than writing them to publish. So not so much because they don't approve them, it's just the logistics of getting all of that. And we're very cognizant of not putting anything out there without the full agreement and support of our participants. So
what might be a useful thing to do is, because we talked about these 7 habits and how they sort of provide the underpinning for determining the collaborative performance. Maybe it'll be just help people sort of just, you know, visualize what that looks like. If so, I'm going to ask Pete to just use a demo organization, just have a look at what are some of those. And this one, I should say, is actually a pretty high performing demo organization, so you can get a sense of how you can link the behaviors when we talk about being email liberated and being an instant collaborator, for instance, and how you can actually measure that. So I'll hand over to you, Pete, to give us a quick tour of that.
Great. Okay, I'm just going to have to do the slightly laggy sharing screen thing, so bear with me a second. Okay. So hopefully everyone can now see Swoop for M365. I am assuming the character, I'm getting into character as Frankie right now. And what I'm looking at here is my personal dashboard. So I'm seeing my performance, my collaboration score as an individual. And here we see those 7 collaboration habits that have been mentioned. So before I go on, Kai, was there anything in particular you wanted me to highlight right now during the next few minutes? I'm conscious I want to make this a nice, tight, short space of time.
I think it might be interesting to have a look at the enterprise level, Pete. And I think that would be good for people to get a sense of how we can identify those top performers in our organizations and dive a little bit more into some of those insights there are for maybe just a couple of the habits.
Yeah, sure. So you'll see I've just clicked on the enterprise view, and in a matter of seconds, I've seen the entire organization's collaboration score and then broken down per each collaboration habit. So I can straight away see the strengths and weaknesses across the whole organization. If I want to view a particular department, I can see those leading departments here. We can actually segment the data in SWOOP M365 by any attributes that you want to slice and dice the data by that you have in your Active Directory. In this case, we're looking at departments, and we see the finance department is coming top. Now I could just click on that and jump into the segment view, but just in the interest of speed, what I'll do is just focus quickly on one of these particular habits and show you how it kind of is calculated and how we make sense of things within SWOOP M365. So email liberated has been mentioned a few times. This is showing you how good people are at collaborating in Teams channels or Yammer compared with sending emails. So are your people addicted to email still, or are they email liberated? So in this demo organization, we see they're actually in the 97th percentile compared to the benchmark. So they are performing at the high end of the very good range. To get a little more detail on exactly what that means, we see here in this organization, people have sent half an email for every one Teams channel or Yammer message. So from the data, we see that people who are email liberated send less than 5 emails for every one Teams channel or Yammer message. So that's what gets you into the good range here. So at this level, at this ratio, you can see why this demo organization is performing extremely high. Now, like I said, this demo data is a very high performing organization. So perhaps many people would turn on SWOOP M365 and see a slightly different result to this, but you may be pleasantly surprised. You never know. Asynchronous collaborator, just to show you this one as well, where we see this shows that how good you are at leveraging the asynchronous tools within the M365 toolkit, as opposed to actually spending real time in meetings or calls. So that synchronous activity versus asynchronous use of channels. And here, this demo organization is performing a little bit lower. They're still in the good range though, but you can see again, it breaks it down to the specific statistics, the specific ratios. That is then what gives you your ranking against the benchmark. So good asynchronous collaborators spend less than 35 minutes in Teams meetings for every one Teams channel or Yammer message. I think it's important here to point out, whilst SWOOP is saying, based on our research and years of experience in this collaboration space, we're saying this is what good looks like. I think it's important to point out we're not saying any particular tool is evil. We're saying what's really important is finding the balance, and that balance varies depending on the habit and what the effective behavior is that's going to generate the best collaboration performance. And so whilst this looks, to me, it looks really quite simple. You've got these 7 clear habits. You're given a score against each that helps you position where you sit as an organization or as a department, for example, or as an individual. And then it gives you advice on what good looks like. So it's all about helping you see the reality of how you collaborate.
I think there's also an important point, Pete, that I guess for those of you here on the call, you will know that there are certain parts of the organization, certain departments where they will never be email liberated. It could be like a customer-facing part of the company that lives off sending emails to externals. And so you will know that there will be for some parts of the organization where they will always score more strongly in one area than in another. I used to be a lawyer before many moons ago, and one thing is for sure is that I think lawyers will be the last we get across the line here, and that's not really because they have to send a lot of emails. Not certainly the in-house lawyers, but culturally, it's probably a group of people that are used to work very independently and like solo players, if you like. Well, that was my experience, at least as when I was in law many years ago. One other thing, maybe because the habits are a really powerful way of getting us to think about what we're doing. And what Microsoft is very good at is giving us lots of usage data, but it doesn't really get us to think about what we're doing. Now, the limitation with the usage data that Microsoft provides is that it's typically only available to admins. But you can see here that we have that little an activity tab that Pete is clicking on. And we thought that, well, okay, so it's probably more important to talk about the habits and the behaviors than to focus too much about like how many emails have you sent. It's as Pete was saying, it's the balance. But it is useful to expose some of these metrics that I think most people have probably never ever seen for their own department. And it is, how many emails do we actually send? And if we do want to have a concerted effort, if you pause there the Teams audio video, which is right there in the middle, and we got email right next to it. If those are the two things we really want to get better at, well, wouldn't it be nice if we can see a downward trend? Also that we are actually sending less email, that we are having fewer or shorter meetings. It'll come through the behaviors. So if you are good at doing this, not just sending less email, but you're balancing that, compensating or substituting some of those emails with channel and Yammer messages, you'll actually see in the usage data those numbers go up, right? But we just find that when you try to get people on the journey with you, showing them this data as a starting point is not, it doesn't allow you to talk about the behaviors that you're seeking nearly to the extent when you talk about the 7 collaboration habits. It's a lot easier for people to connect with the behavior than with the underlying data. Yeah. But of course, it is crazy powerful to go in and say, well, just let's try and see if we can get a downward trend. And you can see this organization here, they've locked in, this is the way that they work. It's basically the same. There's no way up and down. It's very, very consistent for that date range.
One of the other pieces I really love in this, I just want to jump into the segment dashboard here, because you know, Kai, that I'm a bit of a culture obsessive, and in this demo data it's a little hard to demonstrate this, but you can see here this is a really interesting report that we've baked into the activity piece here, and this is where I like to think of it as swoopifying the numbers. You know, we've basically taken the interactions and we've assigned a time stamp to those interactions that we are then able to build what I think of as a cultural snapshot of the way of working for a particular department. So I'm looking here at the IT department, and in just a couple of clicks, I'm able to see, okay, how does the IT department generally work? And we can see here the breakdown of how they spend their time. So they're spending a lot of time in Teams meetings and calls, some time in Teams channels, and then low use here of these other tools. So I would look at this, maybe I'm working in a comms role and I'm thinking, how do I reach the IT department? Well, I sure as heck no, I'm not going to email them. I'm going to be focusing my energy and effort on, okay, they're operating in teams. This is their culture. This is their way of working. And I think this is just such a really nice example of the kind of reports that you can get to get a deeper understanding, a more insightful understanding about the ways of working in the organization. So for me, it's super interesting to go, we start off with these 7 collaboration habits, but then sitting behind that, kind of democratizing all of the data that sits behind that allows you to get these additional insights and this additional sort of level of thinking around how we can reach particular people, how we can communicate with them effectively, how we can work more effectively to help them shift. So the point that sorry, I forget who made the comment in the chat around how do we get everyone to shift from the old way of working to a new way of working. Well, for me, being a practitioner for almost 20 years in this space, a tool like this is critical to kind of saying, where are we right now? Where do we want to go? and giving people that sense of progress as they work to get there together. So yeah, anyway, I could go on for hours and hours about how much I love this. So I shall stop there.
Yeah, the other point, if I was online at the time, you know, peer-to-peer influence in teams shouldn't be underestimated. You know, once you get a critical mass of people behaving in a certain way in a team of, say, 8 or 9 people, you know, it's going to be pretty hard work trying to hold out. Right? So, and we saw that in the data, and that the boomerang curve, that, you know, there is a tipping point around the halfway mark where the leaders start to lead, you know, so the laggards start to follow. And we know that those top teams that we talked about in the case studies are right up there, because they all are working consistently at a consistently high level of all habits, you know, and that's nirvana. That's where you want to go. And we know that people are there, and we know that through the case studies that they're actually delivering extreme value. So we know it's all possible from what we've seen. So, and we know what the journey is going to be like, and it's going to be tough. So some of you that are leading the way with, you know, you're the only leader and the rest of the team are just stuck in email or not even using anything, you know, it's going to be hard work. But that's where the support organizations come in. You know, they've got to help people that are leading the way. They've got to publish the good performers and the good case studies and what have you. And I think, you know, really when it comes down to change, it's the people that you're working with on a day-to-day basis that are going to have the biggest impact on your behaviour, right? The leaders can wave their arms, but, you know, if your teammates really don't like the way that you're working and you're not a team player or what have you, you'll find out about that every day.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm pretty strong on this peer-to-peer sort of work, and then using your support services to help those leaders in that peer-to-peer battle. You know, and it can be won. You know, we've seen evidence, and it can happen. So and I think that journey can be made a lot faster than it's happening at the moment.
Yeah.
So.
All right, thank you very much, Laurie. Let me just see here, sharing that one. Just going to get PowerPoint up. We have one more little poll for you that I'm just going to jump to, which has come up here towards the end of this webinar. So it is coming up here. Over to you, Pete.
Yeah, so just want to get a sense check from you through all that we've presented. Which of the insights presented in today's session is really sort of got you thinking? Which is most relevant to you in your organization, or which is sort of top of mind? Maybe it's inspired an idea right now. So if you get your smartphone, jump onto Menti and give your responses there. Also, while people are doing that, I just want to say thanks to everyone for getting involved in the chat. We've whilst this session's been going on, we've now developed a new SWOOP offering in terms of connecting people in the community. Thanks to Amy Ellis for the inspiration to just run an open discussion session. We'll make sure that everybody who's on this call will send out a note with instructions on where you can register for that, because I think that's something we definitely should do. We've got this fantastic community of practitioners out there across Europe and Africa and the USA, Canada and beyond, basically everywhere, sort of northern hemisphere, this side of the map. I think it would be really fantastic if we can bring people together to tackle some of these juicy challenges in an open forum manner. So I'm excited. Thanks, Amy, for the idea for that, and we'll make that discussion session the campfire conversations they're apparently called. So that's my rapid branding during the session. So we'll make that happen as soon as possible, and look forward to having some good conversations on that front.
Teams channels, yeah. So I did write a blog post a little while ago about, you know, the one practice that could help in that area, and I think, you know, and that's like, look down your org chart and look at the groups at the bottom, and make sure you have a team for every one of those groups. And, you know, once they actually have a team, then at least they have the capability of using a channel. you know, and of course you can support that as well. But you know, a part of that woefully low number is that, you know, they're only being used by people that are developing cross-functional teams, you know, and you know, and not even used a lot there. So, you know, what I underestimated was how little they're actually used by, if you like, the functional organization. So, you know, when you're setting up your teams, architectures and functions, think about, you know, having a sort of policy around, well, every group that's in our org chart at that level, that's, you know, maybe 4, 5, 6 people, you know, you need to set up a team. You know, you need to communicate through that, and naturally they'll discover teams, they'll discover using the hub and all that applications and so forth. So, but at the moment, they're not even in the game, not even participating.
All right, we're coming to the very end of the webinar. I think all of you on the call today, I hope, have already downloaded the webinar. Downloaded the report. Otherwise, there is a QR code there for you to grab it, or just to our website, www.swoopanalytics.com, and you can't avoid finding it. So thank you to Pete, to Laurie. And a special thanks to John from the City Fibre to be with us today. If you want to be amongst the lucky ones to save $70 million, get in contact with us. And if you're being intrigued by what you learned today, if there are certain things we got, I just wonder, like how do we get around the corner, and what does our company or our segments look like in terms of collaboration? Reach out to us, and hope to see you out there on the great interweb. Laurie, Pete and I will hang around here for another few minutes. If you got any questions, feel free to unmute, turn the camera on, and we can just have a bit of a community chat. If you're going to run to the next meeting, then thank you so much for joining us today.